Okay, we're going to get started. Good morning, and thank you for coming to our 8th open forum on analytics. Thank you for joining us. This session is going to be recorded, so if you want to see the replay or want to send it to anybody, you'll find it on the visier.com/crisis webpage. We bring this community together in this time of crisis because the people analytics community is doing important work. It's all about helping people see the truth through data. And it's an amazing community that has advanced many causes in the pursuit of fairness and truth. And this forum has been helpful to so many in sharing practices and ideas, how to mash up data, how to understand what's happening to your population, connected people with resources as those have been spun up. So many of us have now, for the first time, downloaded data from GitHub and accessed free software and done all kinds of things that pushed our limits and our knowledge of people analytics. We have shared the love as a community, but more importantly, we've shared the practices and we have shared enlightenment about what using good data to make decisions looks like. And the stakes have never been higher. The best thing that has ever happened to people analytics is unfortunately a crisis like this, where data can save lives and change the economic outcome for many companies. We're going to go deep into this at Visier's Outsmart. It's our first user conference that's fully digital. I'm lamenting the fact that I won't actually get another lanyard to stick around the door, although my door hand's probably happy about that. I don't know, what do you give away at a digital conference? You do give away a lot of great knowledge. There's a great set of speakers. If you've been to our conference before, it's maybe 40% about Visier, 60% about really cool practices from everybody. Customers and non-customers are welcome, and we've been honored to have some amazing speakers. I think we've got Dave Ulrich, and he's going to take us beyond the three-legged stool and what that looks like in the modern age. And just there's a whole lineup. Go check it out. Go register. Today, we're going to dive into D&I and what it means in this time. If you have questions for the speakers, I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A panel. Just type it in there. There's a chat and there's a Q&A. The Q&A is where I'm going to look for the questions. If you have any other information, just go ahead and share it in the chat. We'll be sharing that back out later. Before we get started on the panel, though, I'd like to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Lexi Martin. Where are you, Lexi?
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
You know what I'm going to miss the most about Outsmart, and I've just missed the most anyway, is hugs. So, hugs to you all. So, are you going to give me my slides?
Sure. You tell me when.
Go for it.
Okay. Let me share my screen.
So, my internet connection is unstable. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you great.
Okay. And the slides. Okay. I'll start with this. When we started, what was it, 10 weeks ago now, I'm still not seeing my slides. I told the group that the number 2 and number 3 initiatives underway at our customers were around improving diversity and inclusion, looking at the data, and also about gender pay equity. And, with good reason, because, we've known for a really long time that diversity and inclusion has value. I think the first report I ever saw on the value of diverse leadership teams was back in 2004, the the Catalyst report. Are you able to hear me? Can
Yep, we can
somebody
hear
say
you.
yes or no? Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
But I think the most salient research right now is that diverse teams outperform and weather recessions better than those that aren't. Great Places to Work went back and looked at the stock prices between for the last economic downturn, 2007, 2009, showing that stock prices of those that weren't diverse dropped almost 36%, but the most diverse companies saw gains of over 14%. There's a ton of research also about the qualitative aspects of diversity of leadership and teams, that they come up with more creative options. The teams that I'm participating on, we've got some really great ideas. So the diverse teams absolutely are contributing more innovation, better outcomes. There was a report that came out today, yesterday, Diversity Still Matters. This is the McKinsey report that is showing the progress made by diversity leaders in both female representation and ethnic minority representation. And it's really astonishingly good that so much progress has been made since the last time they put this report out. Let me go to the next slide, Paul. Having some lags today.
It's early. You've got this. You've got the slide with the full-blown session.
Yeah, the headlines that are coming out. I've been looking at the topic for the last 10 weeks and kind of trying to see the negative ones and the positive ones. So let me start with the negative ones. You know, we've seen the data that we're in a full-blown session, that, you know, COVID-19 is hurting women and minorities the most. The diversity gains have tumbled with almost over 20 million jobs being lost. I took a look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Women unemployment is standing at 16%, 3 points higher than for men. But there was another interesting negative impact of COVID-19 that I heard talking with Manish Goel, the CEO of TrustSphere, the O&A leader in the organizational network analysis. And he reported that using network analytics data, we're seeing evidence that while some leaders are more active, that their activity is across fewer people. So leading to the observation that the diversity of their networks and their level of inclusiveness may be inadvertently contracting. And, you know, this isn't the time to be making decisions alone, but it's maybe time when some of the unconscious bias of leaders is creeping in, and even a little bit of reverting to type. I think we're all seeing that, where, you know, people are afraid and they revert to types that we're not all proud of. Next slide. I will go on to the positive impacts. So also seeing the positive impacts from the pandemic on D&I. There's this silver lining piece that came out pretty early on after we were sheltering in place, that had some comments about working from home, that there's a leveling of the playing field for individuals from diverse groups, where they're now able to, they have the opportunity to influence more to the extent that they're willing to speak up. It also talks about all these, you know, events going virtual, which means that more people within our organization are given the opportunity to attend conferences. The diversity dilemma of COVID-19 is also another interesting article. It's speaking to the positive aspects. And it has some really key questions for executives to be asking themselves about their inclusion stance. How inclusive am I being? Why am I or not? Why am I or am I not including individuals in my decision-making process? why am I excluding? What are the real capabilities I need? And then who do I really need to be bringing into the decision-making process? And it goes on to discuss a really excellent blueprint for leaders and D&I leaders to follow to ensure positive impacts. Obviously, making D&I a strategic priority, following the data, collaborating. If you go on to my last slide, I want to talk a bit about the data and how key it is to ensuring that we really get value from our D&I work. Few more articles have been coming out in the last week or so that speak to the importance of data. This HBR piece actually starts with the fact that D&I work needs to start with the data. We certainly see this with our customers, where having data enables them to shine a light on their issues and to begin to address them. The HBR article says collect, count, compare, set goals, collect data, examine change over time, and in comparison to other organizations. And now we've got the new McKinsey data, so we can compare our organizations to the latest benchmark data. I'm also really delighted to report what we know about our customers by looking at our aggregate data on customers. We published a report late last year on female leadership retention. Our customers were actually already ahead of the McKinsey data, and they improved even more over the last 2 years of using data by increasing the female ratio for managers by 4%. And the other thing is the Forbes 2020 America's Best Employers for Diversity, 26% of our customers are on that list. And the last point I want to make,
it just
Paul,
seems so
did you want to say something?
Yeah, it just seems so simple, Lexi. If you see and count the problem, you're going to have to react to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so back to basics, but you know, please go on. Sorry, I couldn't help it.
The last point I wanted to make is something that I kind of really wholeheartedly believe, is that inclusion is everyone's business. I was talking to one of our customers from the Lego group, Cecilia Weckstrom, who heads their D&I group. And I really recommend listening to her short presentation on D&I leaders. By the way, all these links are live, so when you get the presentation, you can look at all of these. But a key point that I took away from her presentation is that knowing about inclusion at an aggregate level really masks some of the realities. So you really need to be doing a more granular analysis, digging down into the data, seeing where there are issues so that you can begin to address them. And she also goes on to say that the environment needs to be one that people are really comfortable telling their stories about when they don't feel included. And so for this, inclusion really needs to be everyone's responsibility, not just the CEO or the C-suite leaders, but everyone. So I'm hoping that Jocelyn and Stacia and our partner from Willis Towers Watson can speak to, how do we really make inclusion everyone's business when, kind of the actions have to come from the C-level to begin with. So let me turn it back over to you. And Oscar, you will be getting the slides, unfortunately, just not today.
Okay, let's dive in then. So as Lexi said, it starts with, I love that counting model that you had there. We live in a time where we are collecting, well, things have changed. Let me start with that. Everybody here on our panel has either both leads a business or advises a business and is themselves both responsible for people as well as the business and the subject matter itself. Let me start, Suzanne, with the first very simple question. How did you know this crisis was different than something you've seen before? How did you know that that this was a moment that was going to define a generation?
That's a big question. Lead me off with, but it's important. So, well, first of all, hello everyone. I'm Suzanne McAndrew, and I'm the global leader for the talent advice, data, and software business at Willis Towers Watson. I also wear a few more hats. I'm also the global LGBT plus leader at Willis Towers Watson, so leading that network. And like all of you, I'm a human facing this crisis, a mom, a wife, a New York City fighter through and through. So, that question that you asked, Paul, so how do we know that this would be something different, is a really interesting one. I think looking back on the evolution of the growth in inclusion and diversity, and we at Willis Towers Watson, we lead with inclusion first, purposely, because you have to have an inclusive culture to have the elements of diversity you're looking for. You look at the growth of the topic of inclusion and diversity, the importance to boards of directors, to the C-suite, to shareholders on that particular balance within your organization, and the growth on what's been emerging around the employee experience and the clear connections to business performance. To me, I knew this would be different.
It's going to be like this today, huh?
It's both fundamental that every individual, no matter what their job is going through. So for me, as I stood up forums with CHROs and other C-suite leaders, immediately as things sort of unfolded in Asia, to us, it was the paradox, the moment that matters in terms of our leadership as HR leaders, that HR needed to be at the center of shaping the scenarios for the business, but knowing that people are going to feel this in all aspects of their life. And it is their unique, diverse approaches to their everyday that are facing off as we enter each other's homes, as we face schooling children, dying parents, really, really difficult times in keeping up with our work. So to me, it's an evolution, a build on what we've been seeing emerge as a real focus on the humanity side of work that has accelerated during this crisis.
Nowhere does, nowhere else in a company does the human side of our work meet the data side of our work than it does in a people analytics function. And the demands on the people analytics function in the early days of the crisis were huge. Jocelyn, you have been leading, you've been pioneering in the development of the people analytics function. How did you know when the requests started coming in that this was different? How were the requests different than they were before that you knew this was a crisis? And please introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Jocelyn Coldwell, VP Talent Acquisition at TIAA. Like Suzanne, I wear many hats, one of which I also lead our people analytics and workforce planning team for the enterprise, in addition to leading our diverse recruiting efforts, as well as early talent and a host of other things. Suzanne, like you, I also am the lead for our young, which we call YoPros, BRG at TIAA. And Paul, to answer your question, I knew that we were going to play a different type of role and have a seat at the table from the questions that we were getting asked almost daily. Typically in people analytics, what you find, especially with diversity, a lot of times we lead with the quantitative. We lead with the demographics. Can you give us representation? Can we do equity analysis? But the questions that we started getting asked were more around, can you tell us how our employees are doing? how are they feeling isolated? How are they feeling? Can we pulse them more regularly? What are their experiences like? And so now we saw the shift more from collecting and reporting and providing insights on the quantitative data to constantly being asked qualitative. What are the experience? What's the health? What's the well-being of our employees? And that's when I knew, and this was coming from the C-suite reporting to the board, that's when I knew that this was going to be a collective effort, and that our team in analytics were going to really have to begin to understand more qualitatively what's happening with our workforce than we ever had in the past.
So what did that mean for your information gathering, Jocelyn? Like, how did you, like, what other data were you, like, were you spinning up surveys? What did you pull in?
Yeah, so working with our talent management team, working with our employee engagement, you are absolutely right. It's surveys, it's focus groups, it's pulsing the environment just through through interviews. It's also as much as we can, and being compliant with HIPAA, but also looking at a little bit of our benefits data as much as we possibly can, and still respect the privacy of our employees. And so trying to get that holistic picture by mining some of the data that we have, but then also really interacting and pulsing our employees more frequently than we had ever before.
Yeah, this theme, I'm coming right to you. This theme of the diversity of data that the people analytics functions have been consuming during this crisis, right? The frequency at which they're consuming the data has been, it's a different magnitude than it was before. And the cooperation between the people analytics functions and other analytics functions within the organization, we have heard that theme skyrocket. Suzanne, you wanted to add in there?
Yeah, and just to emphasize, Jocelyn, your experience, we kind of go back to the employee experience is such a buzzword in the past, but this is about making it real. And when we look at data elements on customer experience, right, if we go to design thinking, it's the rational and emotional elements. And I think it's really interesting that you talk about the feel, which is such a critical assertive step up in the people analytics function. And that's exactly right. That's where we're seeing the growth in our surveys. I mean, we stood up 3 pulse surveys for our clients in days to our survey clients to get out there. And if you're not asking people how they're doing, you're missing the boat. You're going to make a mistake. I can guarantee it, because they say, by the way, all of you leaders, you're doing a great job. 93% are proud of the way their leaders are handling it. But guess what? Most of them are worried about their security. They have anxieties and fears, and they have distractions. And if you don't know those field data, you're going to miss the boat when it comes to the right strategies to turn around.
And I think data is the operative word there, right? Because what I worry about most in a crisis is the speed of information flows. The fastest information flows from the network you already have, right? And it gets, it's what did this manager say to the manager above them about the manager above them? And there's a natural distortion. We are human. That happens as we get information to the top. So collapsing the top to the bottom, and I don't mean to use those terms in a relative way, that is so important in this crisis. Otherwise, we don't make as about what the collective wants to feel. Jocelyn. No, Jocelyn.
Am I still on mute? Okay, great. I'm just on mute. Paul, you're exactly right. And what I found is, the crisis hit, everyone goes virtual. And so some of those anecdotal observations and that close network that you had through going to coffee, sitting in the hallway, going out to lunch, that's not there anymore. So it's almost as if the leaders have a bit of blinders on and we became their eyesight. So now it's more of a pull, and I think it helps leaders be a bit more objective, because now the only way that they can see into the experiences and feelings and understanding what's happening with the workforce is through a data set. And in the past, they could see it through their real life personal observations, and they're unable to see that now. And so that's why it's very important that we become their eyes, their ears, and let the data tell the story.
Absolutely. Stacia, let me swing this over to you. Introduce yourself first.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Stacia Garr. I'm co-founder and principal analyst with RedThread Research. We're a human capital research and advisory firm. I just wanted to add on to that. So we've been doing a lot of conversations with clients and roundtables and the like. And one of the things that has been potentially a unintended but beneficial consequence of this whole thing is that some of the previous networks and cultures, subcultures of organizations have been broken apart because everybody went to work from home. And so as a result, people are kind of having to refeel their network, rebuild who they're getting information from. And I think that the role of data to kind of inject itself and make a permanent part of the culture, moving us truly towards a data-driven culture, is something that we're starting to see because of that breakup of all these different types of networks and information sources. I know that we're networks in general constricting, but I think that both things are happening. So people are doubling down on their network, but also having kind of traditional cultures broken up a bit.
So, yeah, let's talk about the environment with which we work, right? We often, we want to shape an employee experience. We design an experience. We come in through the front door of the office. We are very thoughtful about how desks and communal spaces are arranged. And now we've been reduced to this, the Brady Bunch view, okay? What are you seeing? How does this impact our behaviors? And how does this impact inclusion? Stacia, did I lose you?
Yeah. So I think this certainly goes to, this plays to the strengths of a certain type of person, often kind of a more dominant personality, maybe a more extroverted personality. And if we think about kind of the underlying power structures that may have existed in organizations before, I think this reinforces what those were. So when it's unclear who should speak, the person who always spoke or who spoke more often will do that. And, since we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we know that's often not the people who are underrepresented, but it's the more represented people. So it has the potential to kind of reinforce behaviors that that definitely were not great before and make them more.
I couldn't agree more. I will tell you that Lexi reminds me on a daily basis that my natural dominance is amplified by this, and I think part of it is, is my brain being triggered by seeing that little green around my box? Am I like the monkey pushing the button for endorphins, Suzanne?
Yeah, I was going to just comment when Lexi put forward some of the things she's seeing. I was jotting down some notes because I think what we're seeing here are just two sides of the coin here. I think on the negative side, I do think it's highlighting exclusion. To me, unless as a leader I give space and air and call on people, it is absolutely, Stacia, what you're experiencing. It's dominant voices, it's I want to be heard, it's all of that. So there's the highlighting and exclusion also is who are you having one-on-ones with? Who are your leaders reaching out to? How are you forming teams? Where are you building your trust, going to trusted network versus the inclusion priorities you had before? I think number two, it's paused inclusion and diversity priorities for the moment, but I'll get to the positive side in a minute. Because it's like, well, what do we do now? We don't have local events. We don't have a priority around this. We've got to reset everything in the company. And the third is there's been a true loss, and it's a worry of mine. The well-being impact, and I'll be curious, Jocelyn, how you've been measuring this, is so great. This is grief. This is loss. And among networks that are diverse networks, this grief around social well-being and mental well-being is on the rise. So those would be the negative side of the coin. I can come back to the positive later, but I'm just curious. I mean, to me, those are some of the challenge.
Yeah, go ahead, Jocelyn, please. Master that mute button. Nope. Let me see what's going on there. There you, now we can hear you. There you go.
Okay. Got it?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay. With some of the negative impacts, but one of my observations, especially for diverse communities, are that you are now less masking kind of who you are, because through the video and the technology, you're now bringing a part of yourself to work that you hadn't in the past. So now you're seeing the little coworkers, you know, the families. You know, Paul, I look at your background and I see, and I can get a glimpse into kind of who you are at home, and you're bringing that into into the workplace. But if it's just like a condensed network, then fewer people are seeing that. And so the challenge that we have is, how do we broaden that network? And we can use in people analytics O&A to highlight what those networks are looking like day to day, and how can we broaden that out such that now more people can truly see who you are through technology, because I do feel that people are a little bit more comfortable sharing in this environment than they are in the environment at work. And so I do think that we can turn this into an opportunity.
So there's a couple of things at play there that are interesting. Number one, the power dynamic of being called into someone's office is gone, right? There's a weird equalization somebody was talking to me about. It was like, wow, I've never talked to so many executives who have to work from their bedroom. I thought they would be have nicer home offices. There's this great equalization that I've seen. But you know, there's you know, I see you're saying, and the intimacy, right, is definitely,
Yes.
The humanization is definitely part of it. But I'll come to some coming soon. Suzanne, I know you wanted to get in on that.
Well, I was going to emphasize those upsides, which is really the moment to challenge that status and embrace some of those positives that are coming forward. So I agree, we are uncovering, and how do we use that as a platform to go forward? And then how do we look at some of the blind spots for that? Because there's a new form of unconscious bias. So right now you're judging the painting behind me. What you don't know is I'm sitting in my laundry room, right? Exactly. So,
Dude, I would have never guessed.
So, you know, the level of authenticity. I think that the other thing to think about is just the authenticity and storytelling. When you're, turn video on, people are getting tired of the video. We talked about this before, but it actually is so important to move past that and be okay if it's a bad hair day. I got mine pulled back. And then challenge the status quo of what your networks mean. So what we're seeing is a real mashup of our networks. So I'm planning for Pride Month next month, and we're doing a whole virtual Pride Month. We're seeing networks come together. So our mental health network is coming together with our LGBT plus network, and we're going to do the first of its kind, 45,000 people invited to a session about well-being and mental health during this crisis. And or inclusiveness, we're doing a virtual event, a signature event, all about families, LGBT plus family pride. Why? We can have our family sitting right next to us for the first time. So I think there's just all these positive opportunities to move forward, and really using data and analytics to push that forward will be key.
The greatest technology integration to happen out of this has been the work-life integration. I have never seen it before. That Stacia.
Except cooking.
Yes. Stacia.
Yeah, I was just going to make the point that I think because this has gone on for so long, we're starting to move from just trying to recreate our previous experiences to doing what Suzanne was talking about, which is actually leveraging the technology to create something better, something different, where we truly can scale. So you have 40,000 people, or having, everyone's families together. my husband, he works at Cisco, and one of their leaders did a story time for the kids reading Knuckle Bunny. I don't know, I've got 2 and 4-year-olds, but like that book, and everyone had their kids around them. It was 30 people in the group with their kids, and it was very much so, to your point, Paul, that integration of work and life, and seeing this tech as a way to do something we never could have or would have thought to do before. So I think that is one of the real upsides.
Jocelyn, and then I wanna ask the panel a new question. Jocelyn?
Okay, just very quickly. Stacia, you make a good point there. Recently, we had a virtual graduation ceremony, our Chief Diversity Officer. I mean, it was just, we thought that we would have maybe 100. I think we ended up with more than 500. But what we found was that it helped us recognize and reward some of our employees that we did not know, were graduating, that were getting certifications or degrees or diplomas. And so now there's that connection that we had, that we hadn't had in the past, simply because we wanted to recognize the 2020 graduates, because we understood that them weren't going to necessarily have commencement. And it turned into reward and recognition for our employees that we just received, and our Chief Diversity Officer, Polly, just received, so many expressions of appreciation. And so how many years had we gone by and not known that this was happening? So once again, that unintended consequence, and being able to use this to move forward.
So I love these stories, and I think that, as much as we saw the dark side of what this means to inclusion, I think there is a whole new world. We're normalizing in new ways. We're finding new ways, and I am especially hopeful. Like, I love the work Manish Goel and Dan George do, and those guys on network analysis, and the digital footprint we're leaving behind here is going to help us understand what inclusivity really means, and we'll be able to take that data in the future, and I'll come back to this, and see how it actually impacts performance, results, etc. But as we said, we lead with inclusion. I think it was you lead with inclusion, Jocelyn. I'm sorry, Suzanne, and then diversity follows, right? This is sort of how you guys approach this. We are at a time where representation is challenged as we right-size the workforce. I've lost count of how many Americans out of work right now, and hiring is slow. What is the impact? How do we start to think about recruiting and downsizing in this environment? How do we make sure that we haven't lost the representation gains that have happened over the last 20 years? Jocelyn, can I start with you? Okay, first we're going to represent your mute button.
Yep, got it. This is going to be, I'd say, especially, my team in talent acquisition. This is going to be one of the, I would say, the biggest challenges that we're going to have to overcome, because, as you said, you've got the retention piece of it, and then you've got the recruitment piece of it. And if we're recruiting less, then how do we maintain the demographic makeup and the gains that we've had? And it's going to, and quite frankly, it's going to be tough. We don't have a bullet. We don't have the solution. But one thing that I can tell you that that we're seeing, and that we're going to explore more, is if we continue to work in this virtual environment, what this means is we can now find the talent and recruit in geographies that we weren't recruiting in the past. And so now that will help us in terms of having more of a diverse slate for the hiring that we are doing, because we have larger opportunity in these different geographies. But the equation is pretty simple. And so we are going to have to, that's going to be a challenge. And we're going to have to make sure that we're mining the data and the hiring that we are doing, ensuring that we are very inclusive of having diversity slates, and be very mindful for it. And then continuing to foster those affinity relationships. Because one of the things that we're seeing is that the affinity groups are moving, and they are being very resourceful and very innovative in terms of their conferences. And so, you know, we still have to continue to invest in those relationships, build those relationships, although we're not necessarily hiring at the rate that we have been in the past couple of years.
Stacia, what does this, you know, how does this put forth a challenge for the recruiting and as well as the analytics tech stack? Like, you know, because this is going to come down to data. We're not going to make good decisions unless we have good data.
Yeah, well, I was actually going to, I can answer that, but I want to come a little bit at what Jocelyn was saying, or in the bigger question, which I think is, you know, we talk about leading with inclusion and then diversity will follow, but a lot of the diversity kind of comes via the recruiting, right? So maybe kind of going back to that foundational we made about we start with inclusion, and I think that it is about using the data to understand our people and their different experiences, and to continue organizations places that are inclusive and people want to stay at. Because, you know, if they leave, that is another way that we're decreasing our diversity. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, particularly as we either furlough people or we downsize, is, you know, what's going to be the impact on and a lot of times the way organizations make decisions is linear, right? Or it might be, you know, level, and we know that that is just proportionately going to impact underrepresented individuals. And so, you know, maybe instead taking a more data-driven approach, for instance, looking at the people who have maybe upskilled more recently on some of these skills we know we're going to need in the future, and using that type of criteria instead of just a strict, you know, kind of tenure way of thinking about the way that we're potentially right-sizing our I really dislike that term. It is downsizing and adjusting to the current realities. But I think shifting the criteria and being thoughtful about what the implication using data is really essential right now.
Stacia, I want to dig in on something you talked about there, because you know, this notion of an objective measure of skills or capabilities is something that, you know, it's been a long dream for those of us in this space. And I have seen project after project stall around, you know, oh, well, let's do a year study on a competency model. And then, you know, you get out to the business and they're like, competency model, this, I can't, tell me, how does this actually work, right? How can we accelerate this? What's your advice to organizations about getting skills data that's meaningful and useful?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. Competency data and models is just, it's this rabbit hole that we all go down and never come out of, or at least not unscathed. So, you know, what I'm starting to see is different organizations that are kind of building these based off of out there, as opposed to kind of building these, you know, custom models. So an organization that's doing this is MC, so labor market analysis, so using a lot of publicly available data, which you can then use within your own organization with some customization to understand. And the beauty of something like that is that it can kind of consistently update on its own. So they have one, IBM obviously has one through Watson. Degreed on the learning side is building it. So there's a number of vendors that are kind of building these that are not, I would say, top down like our old competency models, but are much more bottom up. Now, to say that said, none of these are perfect. I mean, you're absolutely right. You know, I think we are in the infancy of understanding skills data really well. But if we look forward to, you know, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and, you know, the question of what we automate and how we shift our roles, I think we're going to start to think about our jobs really as more kind of project-based and skill-based. And so having this insight will help us now, but it's also going to help us in the future. So if people haven't started the journey, I think there's no time like the present, despite the difficulties.
People have to remember, coming out of this crisis, their ability to deliver services, hospitals discovered this, their ability to do services were defined by the people they didn't know, right? How do I know the people, how do I understand the skills and capabilities of the people that I don't personally know and can't keep in my head? And the cycle time of solving these problems has to get shorter. We've seen people spin up technology projects. We've seen software companies, our own, you know, do releases in 2 weeks that used to take 12 to 15 weeks.
Yeah.
So it can be done, It just takes a little adrenaline. Suzanne?
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I just have one more thing. Just a quick example. So one organization that is, I think, an epitome of the benefits of having done something like this is National Australia Bank. So what they did is they were having a number of organizations or of individuals as well as small business owners come in because obviously it's a financial crisis, economic crisis, as well as a health one. And they just were getting overwhelmed by calls. So they were able to use their existing skills and previous work history data to identify a pool of people who had previous customer experience and move them over, internal transfer. 700 people within 3 days were moved to now doing customer service work who had been doing something else in the bank, but were basically called back to action. So I think that's an incredible example of, if you have this data, if you can connect it, you can just pivot and do amazing things.
I love it. Suzanne?
Yeah, I was just going to, I'm thinking about one of the biggest pain points coming into this crisis was that we didn't have our house in order when it came to who are our essential workers, who are our knowledge workers, what were the skills and capabilities, how do we redeploy? Every organization out there is figuring out how to redeploy resources. My nephew works for a retailer, it's closed. So now he's working at the call center. They figured that out. We're redeploying. And I think back to 2012, I was leading talent management at American Express. We wanted to redefine how it works. And the biggest need by business leaders then was, I can't see my talent. I need Tinder for talent. I need to swipe left, swipe right, really be able to not go on LinkedIn to find my internal talent marketplace. So then these things have grown up. IBM developed their own, Cisco developed their own, Workday acquired one, blah, blah, blah. And yet organizations' investment in these marketplaces went on hold, to be honest.
And on hold because it's overwhelming, Suzanne.
It's overwhelming. So, and then workforce management projects this year on hold. Look, those things around skills, capabilities, careers, we need to have career talks with our people. We're still losing people in these times. Our best people are still being recruited. So we need to have the courage to put forward these tools in a way that bring this together. And there are some good ones in the marketplace. The ones you mentioned, Stacia, we just integrated a new tool, WorkView, that integrates our comp survey data with scraping of skills from a gray label tool. It integrates it. While you're reimagining work, we need to solve this skills capability piece. Empath, it's a terrific skills passport tool that matches jobs and skills. We need to get off Excel spreadsheets and into the real world because work has changed. So that's my call to action. I'm passionate about it.
Jocelyn?
And if I could hop in here, because one of the hats that I wear is I'm over our workforce planning. And anytime, so we're implementing that, we're redeploying, implementing a talent marketplace. We work with MV, looking at others, we're implementing Workday, looking at other skills inventory so that we can understand the skills capabilities. A couple of points here is we also need to understand the same, not only with our full-time employees, but our contingent workforce as well. We've got to have a holistic view to our workforce and understand the skills and capabilities holistically. And secondly, the biggest challenge that I see organizations face is that, okay, now you have your skills inventory, you understand, but what I call is the supply demand. So the question is what are our critical roles? Have we identified them? Not for today, but for in the future. And we're finding out that when we start looking at the future of work and what are the skills that we need, back to what we're talking about in terms of diversity and inclusion, we find out that oftentimes the diverse employees don't necessarily have those skills today. Then how are we investing in development? And it's not necessarily, when I say diverse, it's going to be generational as well. If you look at a lot of the studies, it says that the digital skills that are needed, our older workforce doesn't necessarily have them at the level that we need them. And so there's the equation of understanding fitting to the need, but then there also has to be that investment in development if you want to maintain and increase and have that diversity of thought and have that diverse population in your workforce.
Stacia?
Yeah, I think that this speaks to a shift that we think really needs to happen, which is the philosophy around development and the organization's responsibility for it. So we've for a long time gone in this way of saying, you know what, development, that's on the employee, it's the employee's responsibility, et cetera. And we've gone really far in that direction. I think we need to come back a bit, because particularly if you think about what Lexi shared at the beginning, what we all know, which is that more diverse and inclusive organizations equals better financial returns. Well, you got to get people into those roles. You got to give them the skills to make sure they have the skills, like you said, Jocelyn, to be able to get there. So there's a financial incumbency on the organization. So I think that means that it's not okay for us to say, well, you know, our, you know, hypo leadership program, it's okay that it's, you know, 75% this population, only 25% this. Like, well, that's who came, that's who was recommended. No, that is not okay. And like, we need to take a stance that it needs to be reflect the overall diversity that we should be having in our organization, et cetera. But that's going to take strong L&D leaders, and it's going to take strong CHROs to say we have to shift our obligation to development for our employees.
And at what point is your obligation to develop your employees your obligation to make sure you have sustainability for your business model? And I think, you know, somehow those got separated along the way. Suzanne?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. It's not for just the betterment of our people. It's really because of the needs for the customer base and for the development of products that we're going to bring to market. So this is like the ultimate convergence of inclusion and diversity for customers and our people. And that's what I think it's going to. I'm curious what the rest of you think. I think we're seeing a trend now in the integration of the customer analytics with the people analytics being
Absolutely.
key, you know, aggregated insight that will help build the right business case for some of these programmatic changes.
So we're coming to the top of the hour, right? We covered a lot of ground. I could talk to you all hours. And I hope to do it in person with wine. But a couple of things, right? We've seen the nature of inclusion challenged and change through the distributed workforce. We've seen a new level of intimacy, as well as a new era of digital footprint by which we can measure inclusion and who participates in what. We've talked about the challenges as we downsize, right-size, recruit through this era. We've talked about the data that is there, the practices that are there, and the speed and agility that we need in our workforce and understanding our workforce. When we bring these things together and we think about the opportunity and the challenge in front of us, what is your advice to our people analytics community about how both that and the D&I agenda come together? Why don't I start with you, Stacia?
Sure.
It's because you're in the upper right-hand corner.
Yeah, I think one thing maybe we didn't talk about that is kind of gets at what you're asking, Paul, is the importance of kind of the broad, consistent communication and expectation setting. So to the point that we were making, you know, as this has happened, for many of our networks have shrunk. We know that underrepresented individuals tend to have different and lower power networks, and so they're not getting necessarily access to the same information, and that has decreased now too. So using our data analytics capabilities to understand who's getting what messages, are they getting all the messages, are they getting the access to the information that they need in order to know what they're supposed to be doing, to have clear expectations in the work that they're doing, to know how to get access to some of the information that maybe they would have gotten other ways before, whether it be about careers, promotions, mentorship, learning opportunities, etc. And then tying all that back into kind of what does the inclusion of the network look like. I think we have a real opportunity here because that's the sort of stuff I think is probably happening now, but we're going to see the effects of in 3, 6, 9 months when it comes time to actually do the performance review, do the promotion decisions. So let's do that now.
Suzanne?
Right, on mute. I think the three things that are the call to action now. One, whoever you are, whether you're the head of inclusion and diversity, HR business partner, or people analytics leader, get yourself involved in the reimagining work now and have the courage to ask the right questions about what reset you need to do. Number two, don't forget about your people and their career aspirations. Career conversations are important now. Bring that data in to these conversations and really try to understand, use more predictive analytics to look around the corners, not just keep looking back and triaging. And three, have the courage to rewrite the rules. We've experienced it, and we need to work together as collectives. Don't be afraid to share and say you don't know, but reach out for help, your peer network, to keep moving forward.
Jocelyn?
I would say I agree with what both Stacia and Suzanne said. What I would add is that I think that from a people analytics perspective, we need to be more holistic. Oftentimes I talked earlier about focusing on the quantitative, not the qualitative, focusing on more descriptive kinds of data versus predictive, not working with our marketing colleagues as well as our financial colleagues. I think we have to use the data to paint that holistic picture, number one. Number two, we need to be dynamic with it. Because if we're not dynamic with it, we're not going to have a seat at the table, and we're constantly going to be looking in the rear view mirror. And so I'm saying those two things because it's the last one. If we have the seat at the table, we are dynamic, we're more holistic, then we as leaders can then have a bias for action. Because at the end of the day, we want our leaders to act on this data to improve and bring about the change that we want to happen. And if we don't have the seat at the table, and if we're not timely with it, then we lose that mirror, or we lose that window or that opportunity that we give our leaders and ourselves to take action.
Jocelyn, that is great. When we come back to the purpose of people analytics as we see it, it's to help people see the truth and to create a better future, and to do it now, to take that action now. I mean, that is really what's at the core, I know, of the work that we're doing. There has never been a better time to be in people analytics. I said this a year ago, it's even more true now. It has gone from a vitamin to a pain pill. It's gone from a luxury item to a must-to-have. And our ability to use this for good, to collect this new data, to take advantage of this incredible digital footprint, to this revolution that's happening, to embrace technologies like ONA. I saw Manish in there in our chat session there, to be able to bring this data together in new ways to help people make decisions and include and collapse the distance between the levels of the organization, between what we want to have happen and what's actually happening, between the people who make tiny decisions about who to hire and the larger strategy of greater good. People analytics collapses that. It is the fastest path to a diverse and inclusive society. I thank you all for an amazing panel. We could go on for hours. If you haven't signed up for Outsmart, please go to our website and do that. This has been an absolute joy. The recording will be up on Tuesday. Thank you all. And please, to everyone in the audience, stay healthy, stay safe, stay sane. Take care.